We have, of course, heard an awful lot about levelling up. It has been one of Boris Johnson's mantras since he became Prime Minister. Just tell us a little about what we will be hearing from the PM later today.
Well, the PM's going to be making a speech in the West Midlands, which reaffirms our commitment to levelling up all parts of the country. One of the absolutely central tenets of our manifesto back in 2019, before the pandemic, and which feels even more important than ever now as we're moving into a different period of living with the virus and recovering our economy. And he's going to say that we want to ensure that all parts of the country benefit from this agenda. It's not about the north versus the south. It's not about taking down the richer areas in order to build up the poorer ones. It's to everyone's benefit. This is a national win-win. And we're going to do this by investing in skills, in transport, in culture, and ensuring that there's more pride in places like high streets and town centres. And we also want to give more power back to local communities, because we are one of the most centralised countries in the world. And so we're going to be supporting local mayors like Andy Street here in the West Midlands, where I am this morning, and local councils and communities, so that they can take greater charge of their own destiny as we build back better.
As you say, this was a manifesto commitment back in 2019, the Prime Minister needing today to reaffirm it. I'm just wondering if anything has actually been done on the levelling up agenda since it was announced.
Yes, it has. We've actually made a huge amount of progress despite the pandemic. In my own department, we've been working in 30% of the towns of England, ensuring over £10 billion, the largest ever injection of investment in regeneration, took place. And where I am in Wolverhampton today is one of the recipients of that. To give you an example of levelling up in action, we're investing £40 million in the high street and town centre here in Wolverhampton so that the city can move forwards. We're also working with Andy Street on the tram so that people can get into Birmingham, can access HS2 when that arrives, to get better connectivity to high-paying jobs. And later today, I'm going to be looking at my own government department, which is moving to Wolverhampton so that a young person growing up here can access just the same opportunities as somebody growing up in London who might want to work for government. That feels to me is exactly what levelling up is all about.
My understanding, of course, is if you have to level up, someone has to rather go down, don't they? Secretary of State, good morning.
Hi, good morning. No, that's not right. We're a one-nation government. We want to spread opportunity and prosperity to all parts of the country. And we think this is a genuine win-win for everyone, regardless of where you live. We want to ensure a young person growing up in Wolverhampton, where I am this morning, has all the same opportunities as someone growing up in London. And we also want to redress some of those economic imbalances across the country, because that's the way that we help the overheated London and the South East to prosper as well. So now there's less pressure on housing, young people can get on the housing ladder.
Mr. Jenrick, you are robbing Peterborough to pay Preston, and you've been caught out in Chesham and Amersham, haven't you, where you lost what was a safe Conservative seat. That is the reality.
No, not at all. We want to ensure that there is better public transport, better public services, higher quality skills training for people in all parts of the United Kingdom. This is a one-nation government. We want to represent Peterborough, Preston, and
you're not representing
London,
Chesham and Amersham, are you?
Well, we have a Conservative council in Buckinghamshire that's doing a great job.
You haven't got a Conservative MP.
We'll back that parliamentary constituency at the next general election.
Because you've pumped all the money into the north.
I think the point that the Prime Minister is making, Nick, which you're referring to, is that if you want to relieve some of the pressure on public transport, on housing in a place like Buckinghamshire, where undoubtedly that is an issue that many residents feel strongly about, then part of the way to do that is to ensure that that young person growing up in Wolverhampton doesn't feel the need to come to London to get on in life, but actually can access really high quality skills training and jobs and housing where they grew up. Okay. And that kind of more united, more equal country is what we're setting out to achieve.
All right.
Let's talk about what levelling up actually means. It's something that I guess we've begun to hear about, but the question is, in practice, what does it mean?
Well, the Prime Minister is going to set out later today our vision for levelling up. And it means that a young person growing up in Wolverhampton, where I am this morning, should have access to all the same opportunities to succeed in life as someone growing up in London or any other part of the country. We want to ensure that people's living standards rise, they get access to good skills, to public transport, to culture, and that there's greater pride in our communities right across the country. We're already doing that. We've been making good progress since we were elected in 2019. But now, as we're moving into a different phase of the virus and we're focusing on our economic recovery, this is going to be a really important objective for the Prime Minister, for myself, and for the whole government.
When you talk about levelling up, though, I mean, are you trying to ignore the fact that capital cities, big cities, they should be a national beacon? They shouldn't necessarily be denigrated in any way. Aren't you in danger of moving the creativity? I mean, say, for example, we look at the BBC and we looked at how they moved various aspects of their operations to Manchester. It was a great political move, but did it improve the quality of their output? Arguably not.
No, that's not what we're trying to do. We're proud to live in a country with the world's greatest capital city in London. We want to see London succeed and thrive in the years ahead. But we also live in one of the most economically unequal countries in the world, where young people often feel the need to move to London or the southeast to access jobs and opportunities. And we want to change that. We think that's a win-win for the whole country, because in London and the southeast today, housing is expensive, public transport is crowded, and if we can ensure that there is a more equal distribution of opportunity across the country, then that will be to the benefit of everybody, regardless of where you live.
Part 2 of the Dimbleby food strategy released today, and an awful lot of talk around sugar and salt taxes. I mean, first and foremost, is that something that the government is considering? And secondly, I just wanted to find out your views on potentially sitting down to a plate full of cultured meat, which is another one of the interesting proposals being outlined today.
Well, this is an independent review. It was commissioned by government a couple of years ago, but we haven't had any control over the findings that Richard Dimbleby has come to. Henry Dimbleby, sorry, they're interesting findings. The Environment Secretary is going to consider them and then bring forward our own food strategy in the coming months. So I'm not going to comment on the individual proposals. It does raise a very significant issue for the whole country, clearly. Our relationship with food and farming is really important on a whole range of different levels, from backing those businesses here in the UK, instilling a sense of pride in us supporting local food, obviously health and health inequalities, which are even more prominent as we come out of the pandemic, and our role internationally in striking trade deals and ensuring that we uphold high standards for our food supply. So there's a lot of very important issues that are raised by this report, but we're going to consider them carefully and then set out our own proposals in the coming months.
You'll be aware of Henry Dimbleby's review into new taxes on sugar and salt, the so-called snack taxes. How is it levelling up to put an additional roughly £180 on a family's shopping bill, adding 87p to a packet of Frosties? How's that levelling up then, Secretary of State?
Well, that isn't the government's policy, Nick. It's an independent report.
Oh, you're not. So you've rejected it?
Well, we've only received it this morning.
Let's just clarify. Hold on. So we've got an old Etonian. We've got an old Etonian telling people they should spend 87p more for a box of Frosties. What's your view on that?
Well, it's for the Environment Secretary to read the report.
No, but what's your view on it? I remind you, you are the Communities Secretary.
Set out our food strategy.
Yeah.
I think you have to be very cautious before putting burdens on members of the public, particularly those on lower incomes. That's my long-standing view. This is a substantial report that's been received this morning, and so we're going to consider it carefully and set out our national food strategy in the coming months, which will address some of these issues like health inequalities, like how we do tackle obesity, how we can all educate.
But you wouldn't want to see 87
to
pence on a box of
lifestyles.
Frosties, would you, Mr. Jenrick?
Well, I think you do have to be very careful about going down that road, because I don't want to make life more difficult for people on low incomes. But as I say, we're not going to comment on the individual recommendations on the morning that the report has been released. It's going to be something we'll think
Yes.
carefully about and set out our views later in the year.
A lot of discussion this morning about the sugar and salt tax. So you talked about levelling up. Arguably, if you put a tax on these kinds of foods, you're hitting the very poorest, the hardest. I thought that you were trying to level things up. Isn't this counterintuitive if you start to tax those people?
Well, this is an independent report. It was commissioned by government, but has been produced by Henry Dimbleby without government oversight, if you like. And we're going to be reading it and responding to it in the months ahead when we bring forward a food strategy. It raised a lot of very interesting and important points about the food we eat, how we can tackle obesity, how we can support farming and our local communities. And we will need to give this careful thought. There has to be a balance here, clearly. We don't want to do things which would adversely affect those people who are on low incomes. And so if we think through some of those recommendations, we'll obviously have to give very careful thought to the implications that poses for some of the poorest people in society, and also the role of the state in asking people to do things versus using personal responsibility and judgment, which is always our preference.
I just wondered, with the guidance that emerged to hospitality and retail last night, essentially being the same as it has always been, face masks still expected to be worn in shops, table service should remain in bars and restaurants, customers should be checking in when they enter these premises. I'm just wondering whether we can justify telling businesses to carry on in the way in which they have done, having labelled this day Freedom Day.
Well, what we are saying is that although we're in an immeasurably better position thanks to the vaccine programme, we're still very much living with the virus, and we're going to be for a long time. And so we do need to exercise caution. The vaccine programme has enabled us to move into a different phase where it's not going to be a matter of law that these restrictions and inhibitions remain in place, but it will be a matter of personal responsibility. And so we're asking every member of the public to be cautious, to come to sensible judgments about, for example, the wearing of masks in close contact in indoor spaces, and for businesses as well to consider whether they want to and need to apply those restrictions. And you can already see that organisations such as TfL, which manages the Tube in London, have come to, in my opinion, a perfectly sensible judgment that in the close confines of the Tube, you should be using a mask. And there's also some supermarkets that are coming to that conclusion as well. And we as a government,
there are others, though, however, in the sector
that come to those conclusions.
I mean, all of this is just simply passing the buck. You talk about personal responsibility. You're essentially handing all the responsibility over to the business leaders, the business community, and they don't know what to do.
Well, I disagree with that. We have provided.
You disagree with Hugh Osmond and Roger Barker?
With respect, I disagree with them. We've published guidance today, which you've been quoting, and the guidance reflects a huge diversity of businesses across the country. If you're a business that's operating in a space where there's lots of room, it's very unlikely that people are coming into close contact, then they'll come to a different judgment to, for example, Waterstones, who I understand have announced that they will be asking their customers to wear masks. And, some of their stores are quite small. People might be lingering whilst they're reading books. And that seems, again, a logical decision. And so we trust businesses, just as we trust members of the public, to come to sensible,
I'm not so sure that the business community would agree.
decisions.
Well, I'm not so sure the business community would agree that you trust them. I mean, not a mention of vaccine passports passed the Prime Minister's lips when he announced all of this on Monday. We're now hearing that COVID passports could be used to get into bars and restaurants.
Well, no. Once again, we're saying that there will be some situations where businesses might choose to pursue these policies using their best judgment. And in my experience, having talked to literally hundreds of businesses over the course of the last year, this is the sort of discretion that they want, reflecting the fact that businesses are often in very different situations, and a one-size-fits-all approach backed by the force of the law isn't sensible when we're moving into a period now where, in all likelihood, we're going to be living with the virus for a long time, and we need to take a different approach. That's what we're doing. And personally, I think that there's every reason to believe that members of the public and businesses and operators of transport systems, for example, like the tram here in the West Midlands, that those organisations will come to sensible conclusions. I think that the evidence I've seen so far from the businesses that have announced their intentions, they do seem to be coming to logical decisions or what they intend to do, at least initially, then no doubt they'll keep it under review as the virus progresses.
So a lot of businesses have blasted the government, ministers, your colleagues, over a COVID rules mess. Are you fudging your way out of this, that you've promised to reduce the rules and the restrictions? We've got Freedom Day apparently on the 19th of July. The cases have gone up. You've been told that perhaps this is dangerous, you don't want to do it, but you don't want to do another U-turn. So you're just fudging it and just handing the responsibility to people. It's going to be very difficult for businesses to manage this. Would you agree that the COVID rules are now a mess?
No, I don't think so. We've moved into a different phase of the virus, thanks to the vaccine rollout success, the fact that 84% of the public have now had at least one jab. We are seeing the connection between cases and serious illness or death weakened at the very least, and that enables us to return to a degree of normality. But because we're going to be living with the virus for some time, we're going to have to exercise caution and personal responsibility. That means each of us in our daily lives making judgments about how we behave, how many people it's right to gather with in close contact, whether to wear masks. And it also means businesses coming to those judgments as well. And I think that's the right way forwards, because we're going to be living with the virus for a long time. There's a whole host of different settings and businesses and transport networks across this country, and they will come to sensible, pragmatic conclusions about what's right for them and their staff.
You say that, but then on the other hand, you're kind of putting the responsibility on small businesses to say, OK, well, this is our rule, this is what we want to do, and possibly creating conflict. But let me ask you then personally. So you've mentioned...
I think with respect, it is important that businesses can tailor the response to their own needs, because it's very different if you're in a small shop where people are likely to coming into close contact to one where perhaps it's very unlikely that they're going to come into close contact because it's very large and spacious and there's plenty of room or is very well ventilated. The same's true on public transport. If you were on a train going home of an evening, there's no one else on the train, you or the train operator might come to a different conclusion to if you're on the tram here in Wolverhampton going into Birmingham at rush hour and everybody's in close contact.
When are you going to either wear or not wear a mask? So after Monday, will you still wear a mask in certain situations, and if so, where?
Well, I'm going to carry a mask with me, and I'm going to follow the guidance that businesses put out. So if I was catching that tram and I was being asked to do so, of course I would do that out of respect to the staff who work on that tram and the organisation behind it. Same on the tube down in London. If I was going into a shop, I would abide by the guidance there, and I'd come to a judgment. If there is no guidance provided by the shop or the organisation, I'd come to a judgment as to whether or not I'm going to be coming into close contact with people in that setting. And I think we can all, I don't think this is as hard as some people are suggesting. We are now very well versed in this. We've been living with the virus for well over a year now. And I think people will come to sensible, pragmatic judgments and be respectful to other people and to those people who are working in those settings.
And one other important matter, you might or might not have had sight of today's Financial Times. Their front page story is that in some places the so-called pinging or the NHS app means that 25% of staff are absent. This is in some NHS hospitals. The biggest car factory in the country has 700 workers currently off, and in some instances trains are being cancelled and possibly buses as well because drivers aren't turning up because they've been pinged. Look, we know we needed it, but doesn't it have to be rather more fine-tuned, Mr. Jenrick?
Yes, I think we've accepted that. It is important that we have the app, that we take it seriously, that when we do get those messages, we act accordingly. But we're going to give further thought to how we can ensure that it is a proportionate response.
What does that further thought mean?
Well, the government's going to be setting out its plans in the coming weeks, so I'm not going to preempt those. But we've indicated, Nick, that for those who have been double vaccinated, there are opportunities to take a more proportionate approach. Fortunately, 84% of the population has now had at least one vaccine. 2/3 of people have had two vaccines, so that time is rapidly approaching.
And on Monday, lastly, are the government saying, please go back to your place of work if it's an office or whatever it might be? Please, now you can go back to your place of work, or are the government saying, actually, no, stay at home? What are the government saying as regards to that?
Well, we're saying that as a result of the vaccine rollout, we have the scope to move back to a period of greater normality, but we need to do so cautiously because we're going to be living with the virus for a long time, and cases we can all see are rising very substantially. What this means is we have to exercise a degree of personal responsibility on topics like going into the office or wearing face masks, and come to our own judgments on that, as will employers. If you can work from home, some people will judge that that's the right thing.
So it's down to the individual, the employer.
It is down to the individual, which I think you and I would both agree is the right thing to do, because we should be trusting people.
But what if they don't turn up for work?
Very well versed in these issues. They've been, living with this now for over a year, and we're asking people to exercise their own good judgment.
But lastly, as Secretary of State for local government as well, if we have a local authority where perhaps there's 25% of staff on Monday who just don't turn up at their council offices, city hall, town hall, what is the chief executive meant to do?
Well, they will be thinking carefully about how they can deliver public services efficiently, and we are concerned about absences as a result of being pinged, for example, and so we're working with local councils to make sure that we can keep on collecting the bins and doing all the really important things that local government does. That's one of the reasons why we do need to move to a more proportionate approach with respect to the app. But local councils themselves will come to sensible judgments as to whether their staff need to come into the office or not. Actually, as a result of the pandemic, many councils have concluded that they can move to more flexible working patterns, and that's probably all for the good. It will mean that people can, find life easier, can handle childcare, can have more flexible working lives. We don't expect everything to return exactly to the way it was before COVID.
Housing is expensive. Do you think it's a good idea then to allow house builders to build as many houses as they seem to want to build on greenfield sites and various other places? We haven't really done enough to encourage developers and to encourage builders to build housing in the right places, have we?
Well, we want to see housing built on brownfield sites first. We don't want to see the countryside unnecessarily built upon. We certainly want to protect important places like the Greenbelt. We've been very clear about that. And as we're coming out of COVID, I think there really will be big opportunities to do more in our town centres and city centres. I'm joining you this morning from Wolverhampton, for example, where the government's investing millions of pounds in brownfield land remediation so we can build good quality homes right next to public transport. We're also ensuring that empty and derelict buildings and shops can be turned into homes, that you can build upwards if necessary, so you gently densify those urban places to get footfall and life back into our town centres. So that's at the heart of our housing vision. And if we can create more opportunities and economic growth in other parts of the country and stimulate the private sector to invest more out of London and the southeast, then that will help to tackle the housing shortages that we see in those places. But you say, we're also trying to ensure that government moves out of London as well. And I'm stood this morning in my government department's new headquarters in Wolverhampton, which is going to bring hundreds of good quality jobs to this part of the country. And it's things like that which I think will help to redress some of those imbalances and ensure that all parts of the country are prosperous, have good quality jobs and opportunities for young people.
Okay, you talk about that, but then on the other hand, if you have a look at the stats, they'll tell you that housing developers have got enough permissions to build 1 million new homes. One of the reasons that they can't buy those new homes is they can't get the development finance. And then one of the further reasons that they don't want to get the development finance is because of the rules that we have over people's borrowings, that they can't borrow the money that they need because we're still in a hangover from 2008, and we have multiples that assume that we're going to have interest rates at 5, 6, 7%. Until we change the lending market, we're not going to make any progress on this.
Well, you've raised several questions there. The first thing to say is we are actually doing well as a country at building homes. Last year, we built 240,000 new homes, which is more than in any year in my lifetime. So as a result of the policies of this government, we are building homes. We need to go further because we want to ensure that young people and those on lower incomes can get on the housing ladder. And all of us want to ensure our children and grandchildren can enjoy being homeowners. We also need to ensure that builders, particularly the small builders, can get access to finance and can build out sites. That's one of the reasons we're trying to modernise the planning system so that the cards aren't just stacked in favour of the big volume house builders. And we also want to make it easier for young people and those who are aspiring to be homeowners to get mortgages. As you say, that's really important. And the Chancellor and I have created the 95% mortgage guarantee scheme that we launched earlier this year. That
Yes,
makes
but
it
that's
much easier to get a mortgage.
That's not dealing with the multiples, though, because you're encouraging people to borrow too much money that arguably they can't pay back, and you're not necessarily giving people the freedom to be able to borrow money when they can afford to pay it, because nobody's looking into the finance markets, because you're looking at the bigger picture, and you're looking at permissions, and you're looking at the planning system, which is still very complicated and difficult to access, regardless of the reforms, and yet you're not really looking at the symptoms. You're looking at the symptoms rather than the causes, and the causes are the finance market and the taxation policies that we have. And until or unless somebody's prepared to change those, we're going to be in the same place, that people are not going to be able to get onto the housing ladder because they're not going to have enough free cash.
Well, we're trying to do both of those things. You're right to say that it's important to modernise the planning system and to build more homes, because at the end of the day, there's a supply problem in this country. We do need to build homes in the right places to ensure that people can get on the housing ladder. We also need to make it easier for people to get mortgages. The rules that you're referring to are a matter for the Bank of England, and they keep those under review. They make the decision as to what would be responsible lending for banks. But what we as a government are doing are bringing forward a range of different options which people who are first-time buyers in particular can use to get on the housing ladder. The 95% mortgage guarantee is one of those. The other is the Help to Buy scheme, which over 300,000 families have taken advantage of so far. We're also bringing forward First Homes, which is a new scheme that enables people to get discounts of 30 to 50% on a home in their local area, particularly for key workers like NHS and social care staff. All of these schemes are available on ownyourhome.gov.uk, where you can look up how we as a government can help you to get on the housing ladder.
Right.